Hello, hello. Let me just check if everything is working. If I'm live, if I can hear myself. How is everybody doing? Okay, yeah, looks like I can hear myself. Great. Okay, so hello, hi Sarah, and I think who else is joining us? So I can see the chat correctly now, and I can see the video. Great. So we're going to be looking at creating language learning routines and how to be a little bit more consistent. So I feel that Sarah and Annette, you're probably more qualified to talk about this than I am. I'm usually just writing the emails, but you are practicing. I've been struggling a little bit lately to both create the content, create the questions and the emails, and also to be practicing at the same time, but and finding new students. So right now my attention is a bit split among various goals. I hope that's not an excuse, but everybody is busy. That's a kind of a default setting for most language learners. We have many different things to juggle. So that can be work, family, other commitments as well. But the like how you take part in a challenge, for example, starts to gradually become a habit. I think the first few months, the first few sessions can be the most difficult because it's not just a question of learning the language. I think the first few days, the first few weeks, it's also learning about how to create a schedule, how to create a routine, how to build a habit little by little. And there can be many obstacles that can get in the way at the beginning. So I'd like to share a few insights that I've learned from almost the past 3 years now of organizing this. And my own performance has been kind of up and down at times, but there was at one point a block of about 6 months that I tried to kind of hack, use some reverse psychology to make sure that I would create a habit, a non-negotiable habit, so that every day before I would go to bed, I would make my recording. And in that case, it was several recordings in at least 5 or 6 languages. And I really wanted to just kind of prove a point to myself that it was possible not only to learn or practice speaking one language, but actually it was possible to do multiple languages. After that, I got a little bit burnt out after 6 months, but there were some takeaways from that experience, some insights. So just also want to say here, hi, Tatiana, how are you doing? Thanks for joining as well. And so I have probably mentioned this so far in emails from time to time about Charles Duhigg. And if in case you haven't seen his TED Talk, I would recommend checking that out. Here, I'll put that over here. That was a very that changed my perspective on the habit forming process. So most people, when they think about habits, they will focus on the action itself. However, in Charles Duhigg's TED Talk and his book by the same name, Power of Habit, he also talks about that there is a before and an after with each action. And the before part is some kind of a trigger. It's some kind of, maybe it could be an alarm. So if you set a reminder on your phone, that could get you to remember a habit or something that you need to do, or something you need to do on a regular basis. And from there, how you respond to that trigger will become your habit. There can be good habits and bad habits. The triggers can remain the same. So the example that he gives in his TED Talk is about how at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he's a journalist. He would get up and he would want to get a snack. So he would go to a vending machine, get some cookies, and while he would be eating those cookies, he would have a conversation with one of his colleagues. And but he realized that the habit that he was building was like he was going to be gaining weight because of that impulse the afternoon. He would get up, go somewhere else, get some cookies, go talk to a friend, and he realized that what he was actually craving was not the cookie itself, not the food, but the conversation. So he kept the trigger in place, this like 4 o'clock impulse to get up and go somewhere or do something different for a change of scenery. However, he skipped the cookie part and just went straight to talking with a colleague or somebody else. So in the reward of that whole process of like the cookie and the talking, the actual reward was the talking part, not the cookie part. So sometimes with some of our habits, what we're craving, what we want, might not actually be the action itself, but it's the reward process. And sometimes that is the brain chemistry. It's the dopamine. It's this sense of pleasure that we get from doing something that we like. And the action, the habit that you create is this kind of key to get the reward. So sometimes you need to think of that process of what's going to remind you, what action you're going to do, and what's the pleasure you get out of that. What is motivating you to continue that process? Because eventually that process will become automated. If you turn it into a regular habit that you do it frequently enough, that process will, you have the expression force of habit, that you do it as a reflex. And sometimes those reflexes, they become subconscious, that we're not thinking about them. We do them instinctively. And you sometimes have to be careful about that, because bad habits can also take root if you're not aware of what is like causing the start of that, and then what reward you may or may not realize that you're seeking. So, for example, if somebody is a smoker, maybe the trigger could be some level of stress. And the cigarette, maybe the fact like they can go outside and smoke. Maybe they're not actually craving the cigarette, the nicotine, but maybe what they really want is avoid the stress of maybe some difficult conversation or topic. And what they would actually like is a break, a pause where they can go be by themselves and have a few minutes. In some cases, the cigarette, if somebody's not allowed to smoke inside, it becomes an obligation that they have to go outside. It becomes maybe a possible excuse to leave a conversation, to say, oh, I'm going to go smoke. And maybe what they actually get is that pause, that break. So in that case, that creates a habit of stress, get a cigarette, smoke, isolate themselves. But what they're really looking for is maybe the isolation, not the cigarette. That could be an example of a bad habit that could affect somebody's health. But maybe they could replace that with something else. Like they could say, oh, I have to go make a phone call, and they could achieve the same goal of having a few minutes of isolation. So the cigarette itself might not be what the person is craving, but maybe that moment away. So good habits, bad habits can be formed depending on what action you have there. And what Charles Duhigg mentions here is that if you want to change bad habits to good habits, he says, don't try to change everything. So don't necessarily change the trigger, change the reward, but change the action, the habit itself. So if somebody wanted to reduce like smoking, they could replace that cigarette with, okay, I'm going to go get a snack. Like I'm going to snack on some carrots, like so I can have something in my hand. But there still might be a trigger like stress and maybe a reward, a moment away or something. Just want to say hello also here, Hicham. So yeah, glad to see you. Thank you for your help. Yeah, in Morocco, great. And doing the challenge in English, great to have you join us here. So in terms of language learning and taking part in the challenge here and forming like a habit, I would also recommend, there's a book by Gretchen Rubin. The name is The 4 Tendencies. Let me get a link here as well. And she has a quiz on here about these 4 tendencies. And what I'd like to say there about those 4 tendencies, where she takes into account how people respond to external obligations, stimulus, and internal, like yourself, obligations and commitments. So basically on here, of these 4 people, an upholder, that is somebody who will respond positively to external commitments, like promises. Like they would promise a friend, I will meet you at the park at 2, and they will be there. For their own personal commitments, say, okay, today I want to make my recording for the speaking challenge, and they will do it. That person would be considered an upholder. They would be faithful, fulfilling promises to other people and to themselves. An obliger, I think I identify myself with this one. So this is usually where, if there are commitments to friends, to students, to my family, I usually will fulfill those promises, those commitments, because I don't want to let people down. I make promises to help people and say yes. However, for my own personal commitments, sometimes those go to the bottom of the priority list. So I allow, like, I help other people first, and then myself, I might neglect that at the end of the day. And unfortunately, if speaking practice is my priority and I put other people's priorities first, sometimes that can be neglected. So for myself as a obliger, I would recommend, like, okay, before I start my day, before I start looking at emails, messages on Facebook, messages on WhatsApp, messages on Instagram before everybody's priorities comes into, once I turn on the phone and be aware of that, I should probably give myself 5-10 minutes, do my things, do my priorities first, make my recording, do a little bit of my learning, and get that out of the way so at least I honor my commitments. And then I can start the day and go through as a teacher, as a trainer, as somebody helping a lot of people, go ahead and help those people. So the putting myself first is not necessarily something that comes instinctively. Like I have to remind myself, like, Jonathan, go eat, get some water, take care of your health, not just attend to everyone first. Now, the other two on here, questioner, this would be somebody who maybe almost rejects external priorities, external obligations, requirements, like things that are mandatory, that are requisites. So like they would, well, why do I have to do that? Like, that's your priority. Why do I have to do that? Why do I have to conform to that? They may honor their own commitments, their own goals, but they might question these external requirements. That would be a questioner. And a rebel, this person says no to everything. That, like, not only do they reject external obligations, but even their own, they would say, forget it. I can't commit to that myself. If I can't commit to other people, I'm certainly not going to commit to my own goals. Those people might start the new year, like in January, and say, New Year's resolutions, forget it. That never works for me. So being aware of those tendencies and how you respond to those, like, internal, external reminders or commitments, that can also play a role in the habit forming process. So for me, what works for me and why I enjoy organizing the 30-day speaking challenge is that by making a commitment to other people and everybody who takes part in the speaking challenge becomes an accountability partner for me, because I don't want to let people down. I want to give people value. I want to help people. So this creates the context for me to create a positive habit. So a positive habit for me is maybe every day I write an email. Every day I think of some topics that people could talk about. I might go in and, if I have some time, listen to some recordings, maybe think of, like, maybe not necessarily leave feedback, but maybe listen and then reflect on those recordings to what can we follow up with in the next topic. So it gets me into a habit of doing something every day, being productive every day, whether or not I'm speaking, but at least I'm writing and reflecting on the language learning process, the habit forming process. So using accountability partners, it doesn't have to be a group of people, but for many students, that could be having a teacher who says, how are you doing? What's your progress? Did you do your homework? Did you do this? Depending on those tendencies, that external getting asked by a teacher, somebody could respond positively, or they perhaps could respond negatively, but it's good to be aware of that. Or create your own reward system that, like, motivates you to create that habit. If you respond well to your own commitments, try to give yourself some rewards. I don't know, a piece of chocolate, put some money in a jar so that you can buy something at the end of the month. So try to think of those rewards versus maybe punishments. So recently I mentioned in one of the emails this loss aversion, where, for example, if you see a discount going away, if you don't respond, that losing or that missing out, that fear of missing out, sometimes that can motivate somebody to take action. Right now, I'm in a health fitness program. And for me, what's motivating me to kind of be careful with my diet is a possible punishment if my weight goes up. Like I don't want to do these burpees where you have to kind of go down, jump back like with your feet and then jump up. Like I had to do a lot of them last week. I don't want to do them again. So this weight gain, which would be something in this case a little bit negative, I want to avoid that negative thing, and that actually kind of motivates me to take action. So some people can respond to those possible punishments, in some cases a little bit better than rewards. Recently, for example, also paying my water bill. If I don't pay the water bill on time, the price will go up. So I can avoid a penalty of paying extra money if I pay on time. Sometimes people could phrase that as if you pay on time, you get a discount. But there's some psychology there where of getting a discount versus avoiding a penalty. Some people respond perhaps better to avoiding a penalty. But again, be aware of your tendencies, be aware of how you react to those things with rewards and punishments. I took part in 2 other challenges where I gave myself a penalty of not drinking coffee for a year. That actually did happen. In 2016, I gave up coffee for 12 months because I did not fulfill the minimum effort that I was going to make for recording myself every day, or a certain maybe recordings or a certain amount of short stories I was going to read. So I didn't fulfill that, and so I gave up coffee for 12 months. A few months after that, I took part in another challenge, and I interrupted that one because I was doing 2 at the same time. I did 3 months of Russian, and at the same time, in like the middle of the second month, I started 3 months of Greek, and I had a hard time doing Russian and Greek, and the Greek one got interrupted, and my penalty there was 12 months without alcohol. Later on, some of my friends said that's not a penalty. That's actually good for your health, giving up alcohol for 6 months or 12 months. But ironically, in my family environment, giving up coffee was not such a big deal because either you drink coffee or you don't, or somebody else will drink tea around you. But apparently giving up alcohol, other people who want to drink with you, they no longer are going to drink by themselves. So they feel slightly offended if you're not drinking with them. So inadvertently, other people around me drank a little bit less because I gave up alcohol. But that was not one consequence that I had kind of thought about when I decided to give that up for a year. But so actually, the giving up the coffee and the giving up the alcohol for a year, that also taught me a little bit about commitments and self-discipline. So even though I had failed on my language learning goals about recording myself or doing something every day, however, the sticking to no coffee or no alcohol, that taught me a few other things about okay, I can. The first month, first few weeks, I can deal with that. Maybe it was hard. And then it was just becoming a habit. I didn't have coffee for a month. Well, I'll just keep going like this for the next 11 months. I got over the first hurdle of that first month. That was the hardest part. After that, it's just keeping the habit in motion. So with some of these habits, if they are difficult at first, they can get easier by just staying in motion. Let me go back over here, look at some of your questions. So I think Annetta mentioning, do you think it is possible to change your inner tendency, let's say from a questioner to an upholder? So in that case, as a questioner, you would be rejecting or at least kind of reticent with external factors, there I think changing somebody's personality, that can be a little harder, but there might be strategies involved where if there are enough reasons to convince somebody to accept something, they might go along with it. So I would say, for example, my wife is a questioner. So if I suggest something, if I recommend something, if I make a proposal for let's go do this or let's do that, she probably won't accept that on face value. I will need to come up with convincing reasons and arguments to show the benefits or the advantages or why this suggestion is better than something else. And if I'm successful with that, she might accept that and respect that and go along with that plan. So somebody who is a questioner, if they can hear enough reasons, convincing reasons, they might go along with some plan, requirement, commitment, and as they might be good already with respecting their own kind of internal promises, commitments, if they're convinced by an external one, they could probably go along with that. Convincing a rebel to change and becoming an upholder, I think that would be even more challenging because they would be saying no to themselves and knowing no to other factors. But I don't know. I'd have to look around of, are there people who have changed or if they have adopted different approaches, but it would probably need to be step by step and something to convince people or rewards to make them consider that. Sarah, yeah, maybe you could always write one short paragraph in one of your target languages when you write the email, so you have your existing habit combined with some practicing. Oh, that's a very good idea. Yeah, so I could, since I'm already in the habit right now of writing each day, some days can be a little bit more challenging. Sometimes I'm losing sleep, thinking like, well, what am I going to write about today? So that's one of the challenging things of the writing every day, is trying to do something unique, or trying to do something, even though we repeat some topics, but trying to find another angle. So what are we going to talk about next? Sometimes that can be a little challenging. And that leads me also here to this idea of plan ahead. So early on in the challenge, people were suggesting, could I anticipate what we're going to talk about next? Like after today's topic, what are we going to talk about after that? That got me into a good habit of planning ahead. Instead of just focusing on, well, what are we doing today? And that's a little bit like opening your refrigerator and saying like, well, what are we going to eat today? Like, I don't know. And then you open up the fridge and you realize like, okay, we have nothing. I have to go to the store, or I have to cook something. Well, it's too late now. We're hungry. I should have planned ahead. So food preparation for lunch, dinner, like especially if you have a family, that stuff can be a good example of like what happens when you don't plan ahead, and then you're hungry, and then you have to do something. So with the speaking challenge on the emails, planning ahead, what are we going to talk about after that? Sometimes this allows me to think about like, well, what vocabulary should we consider? What grammatical features? What things on pronunciation? How can we help people prepare a little bit going ahead? Now that I've been in this health fitness challenge since January and now the middle of February, this is also helping me reflect a little bit on what we're doing each day or what we're doing each week in the speaking challenge, and not necessarily just isolated random topics. But for example, in the health and fitness challenge, what we're doing there is a mix of like every other day there's cardio, so working on maybe stamina, that can be endurance with kind of staying in motion, doing a variety of things that could be oriented towards the leg muscles or the upper torso or maybe the abdomen. And then another day after that is strength. So we will be doing exercises that are lifting weights, and in a variety of positions. So either lifting with these muscles or like leaning back. So that would be targeting a different area. So this is getting me to reflect a little bit on not just targeting the speaking topics as random topics, but perhaps having a focus on the what would be good for pronunciation, what would be good for grammar, what would be good for vocabulary building, what would be good for spontaneous memory and speech, and maybe targeting the questions or the topics based on the skill set that would be also involved there. So we could alternate. So I'm going to try to implement that a little bit more in March, and maybe not just planning our topics a day or two in advance, but maybe a week in advance. Of on Sundays, I'll be thinking about what could we cover for the next 5 or 6 or 7 days. So trying to get the challenge little by little more organized, but this idea of planning ahead, I think, is really important. And for a lot of times the language learning, looking at a blank page, well, what am I going to do today? What should I work on? What should I review? That can sometimes kill motivation. So if, as you finish your previous day's session, maybe plan ahead. What should you target? What should you focus on the next day? And give yourself maybe 3 priorities, 3 goals. Maybe attach a small, like a SMART goal, kind of that it's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's realistic, and maybe it's time sensitive. So you're going to do that during a course of 30 minutes or so. So plan ahead for the next day's situation. For other people, this could be like planning your wardrobe for the next day before you go to bed. So like if you're not good at like too many options, selecting like, well, what I'm going to wear and combining clothes, if that causes stress, maybe do that the day before, and get that planned out. So maybe have a couple things ready to go that you don't have to think about it. Because sometimes when you're tired or it's in the morning or things, that extra thought process, maybe you're tired, you don't want to do it, maybe it causes stress. So if you can plan it in advance, do several of them as a batch, meaning as a group, that can cut down on the time that's spent on the decision making process. So the next day when you're ready to go for your language learning routine, you know what your target is, you know what your goal is. You just have to implement it. Part of what I like with the fitness program is I go there tired, and I have coaches who are thinking for me. I don't have to go to the gym, look at all the equipment, and try to figure out, well, what should I do? What should I work on? I don't know. I'm not a fitness coach. I have not studied this for several months or gotten a degree in this. So having a coach think for me and say, we're doing 5 things. That's it. Like it's small, it's manageable. We're doing 5 things. We're doing that for a half hour. Go ahead. Okay, here it is. Boom, 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 boom. It's minimal. It's realistic. It's not overwhelming. It's something I can do for a short amount of time. And over the course of this past month and a half, I have been seeing the benefits of like increased muscle and strength, and also the legs, and also some weight loss. So there are longer term benefits. I might not necessarily see them every day. Similar in the speaking challenge, I might not immediately see a change in pronunciation or grammar or vocabulary range, but over the course of a couple of weeks, and of course over months and months, and even years for some of you, you will see those longer term benefits. And it might not, you need to stay motivated, you need to stay committed for something to build that habit for you to eventually see those longer term benefits. If you're only in it for the 1 week or the 2 week process, it can be a little hard to stay motivated at that beginning. You do have to have some faith, some belief that keeping at it will be beneficial in the long term. So having organized the speaking challenge, going into this fitness one, I did have some faith and belief that if you stick to something for 2 months, there will be some ups and downs, but gradually there will be benefits. And I am starting to see them. I am starting to see them after a month and a half. Things are starting to become a habit. And I'm also noticing that if I have a few days off, that it's not the end of the world, but it becomes a reminder of, oh, I need to get back into that habit. So this last weekend, I had to skip Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for those half-hour routines. And when I came back home for starting up again on Monday, I did have some more back pain, and I let the diet go for a few days. And those were two reminders, the physical feeling of like, oh, okay, this is hurting a little bit. I'm not as flexible as I would have been if I had stuck with those practice routines for those extra 3 days. So that can be a motivation as well to get back into a habit. And that would be also avoiding pain. That's one thing that can help motivate people sometimes is so with speaking challenge, if you skip a couple of days and you realize you're forgetting words, you're hesitating more when speaking, those can be some reminders. Get back into a habit so that you can avoid feeling rusty. So that rusty feeling that if you don't practice something for a while, that can also be a motivator to get you back into something. I have seen many people stop in the challenge and then come back a few months later after sending them maybe like an invitation. And sometimes they realize like, okay, I was getting a little rusty. Let's get back into practicing this a little bit. Now, other things I would like to mention here is this, like aiming for a minimum and making that a non-negotiable. So aiming for the minimum, this can be a little hard at the beginning of the month because usually people are very euphoric, meaning that there's an adrenaline rush, that something is exciting, they're pumped up, they're motivated, they're ready to go. And unfortunately, I mean that's great, but unfortunately some people can overcommit to what they can do each day. So there's a tendency to say, like, yeah, I'm going to do 2 hours of study. I'm going to do 3 hours of study every day. And unfortunately, what that sets them up for is going to be a lot of disappointment when a few days later, they're going to get burnt out. And that's terrible because then they're going to give up the rest of the month because they had done too much too early on. And it's really important to consider these like 30-day situations like as a marathon where you don't want to be sprinting and running as hard as you can on day one, because by the time you get to the middle of the race, you're going to want to stop. So you do need to pace yourself, and I would say aim for a minimum effort. Make that a habit first. So before you commit to 2 hours, start with a 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute commitment. Respect that for a couple days, and then gradually increase the time to see what you're capable of and to test your limits. But if you set too far an extreme, that's really going to set yourself up for disappointment, and we don't want that at the beginning of a challenge. So the minimum, I think, is really important. So if 5 minutes is stressful for speaking improvised, make it 1 minute improvised, or start with reading a script for a minute. Do it in baby steps or gradual steps where you do one thing easy, one thing hard, then another thing hard, back off a little bit on the easy part, and see what your balance is, so you can build that up for the that process. If every day is challenging, maybe do 2 days. So let's see what Tatiana is saying. If I don't make daily videos but do other learning routine like listening, I could blame myself for skipping some days. I think you might want to be tolerant and consider that every day you're doing something. So your learning process is still in motion. So do give yourself credit for that. It doesn't necessarily have to be like always making recordings. I mean, we have the platform in place for the every day, but I think for several of you who are more experienced and have been doing this for a longer period of time, it might be you have an awareness of some weaknesses where you might want to focus your attention, and those things would definitely be appropriate. That if you're doing at least something each day, that you're maybe targeting a skill each day. So maybe this day I'm doing listening, the next day I'm doing reading, after that I'm doing writing, day after that I'm doing speaking, or maybe cut them into smaller chunks. So maybe every day I'm doing all 4 tasks, but you would want to find a way to make that manageable. So obviously, like dedicating 4 hours, 1 hour to every skill, that might not be manageable, but maybe you could turn this into a routine where like 5 minutes this, 5 minutes that, 5 minutes this, 5 minutes that. So maybe turn it into a 20-minute routine, or maybe dedicate 20 minutes to one skill. But be open to experimenting with it, trying to see what works for you, and being kind to yourself. Like, give yourself credit for the fact that you are learning, you are doing something on a regular basis, whether or not it's the exact same skill. And I think in some cases doing 15 recordings could be effective as opposed to 30 recordings and feeling stressed out, or feeling kind of not having the time to go back and review, or not having the time to kind of what did you learn, what was missing, what could be improved. So only staying busy for 30 days in a stressed out way, I think it might not always be effective. But if somebody who has developed this as a habit, and they're like, for example, as Aneta said, like here, addicted to the challenge, I think she's putting in a lot of effort on the vocabulary and really reflecting on some of these topics. So there are opportunities to go into more depth with the topics, but it's really important to know what your availability is, how much time you can dedicate to this. And as I say here, like, aim for the minimum first to make sure that you can manage that and not get burnt out. And definitely give yourself credit for the time you are dedicating to your learning. I think the guilt or frustration, or I missed a day, or I didn't do enough. I noticed that in one challenge that I joined where I said I was going to commit to an hour every day, and then I did a half hour one day, and then I tried to cheat by doing 90 minutes the next day. It didn't quite work as well as I thought it was going to, because I felt like I just was constantly cheating myself. So the next time around, I didn't do a commitment of 1 hour. I tried to just commit to a half hour. And so I didn't feel like I was cheating. It felt like I did the half hour, then anything over that 30 minutes was like a bonus. Like it was extra. So one other learner I know has mentioned, like for exercise, like challenge yourself to do 1 push-up, and you're probably going to continue. So you do 2, you do 5, and then before you realize it, you've now done something for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, as opposed to do nothing. So for like doing something challenging, like reading a book, maybe just challenge yourself to, can I at least read 1 page? And that might encourage you to keep going a little bit more. I've seen that for people running. I remember seeing one video where a person was tricking themselves into saying like, okay, I will rest when I get to that next hill. And then when they get to that hill, they just tell themselves again, okay, I'll rest when I get to the next hill. So they would just convince their brain like, let's keep going. But then when they got there, they said, well, like, let's go a little bit further. I see that with my kids where they're like, well, just the last time, if I can go down the slide, one more time. And so that one more time, it never stops eventually, or eventually it stops, but you can commit yourself like just a little bit more. So start with that minimum effort. Don't force yourself to commit to an hour or 10 pages of an exercise or 1 hour of listening practice, but maybe start small, and then you can trick your brain into a little bit more, and then I'll rest. So sometimes that psychology can get in the way of how you feel about the effort you're making, but the minimum one seems to work. The reason why the 30-day speaking challenge is 30 days is also a minimum effort, because I took part in a 12-week challenge. I took part in a 90-day challenge. Inspiration for the 90-day challenge is also a 3-month challenge. And I saw that of those 3 programs, what they all had in common was 3 months. And I noticed that people could do well in the first month, they would struggle in the second month, and then recover a little bit in the third month. And I decided, well, what if I just do a 1-month challenge? And of those kind of ups and downs, maybe we condense that into 1 month and not necessarily get the dropout of what happens in the second month or trying to convince people to come back in the third month. So I've just tried to keep it as a 30-day program. And as I've told some of you in the emails, in fact, it could be considered a 1-day challenge. Just commit to today. Forget about the past. Forget about tomorrow. Just, can you do something today? Just check it off your list. And then the next day, come back and only focus on today. And then just keep focusing on today. Do that 30 times, and that's a month. Some people might look at the month and go, oh, that's such a long period of time. I can't commit to that. But if you can at least just only focus on today, like horse blinders, forget about the past, forget about the future, just today. Can you do something today? In that case, people can usually say yes. And if I go to the fitness program, if they told me everything that we would be doing this month for the month of February, probably I would feel overwhelmed. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to have to do this 20 times. I'm going to have to do that 40 times. I would be working myself up and feeling kind of like, just, I can't do that. That wouldn't be manageable. But if I go in there and I know it's going to be 30 minutes and I know they're going to probably give me 5-6 different things to do, each one of those things maybe probably doing it for about a minute. It's really minimal effort for a minute, and then I rest a little bit, maybe change, do something else for a minute. And by the time I realize it, I've done a 30-minute workout or 25-minute workout. And so it's not exactly tricking myself into getting exercise, but it's just a series of minimal efforts. Like I can do something for a minute, that's fine. So the pain, if something is uncomfortable, it's minimum. So the commitment is minimal. If there's any discomfort or pain, it's very minimal. And usually the brain kind of says like, oh, I can't do that. And then you realize you can. So sometimes we do need some convincing to realize like we are capable of doing more than we think we can. So minimal efforts at least get you your foot in the door to start something. Try it, do a couple rounds, kind of go around to different activities, come back to it, maybe do that a little bit better the next time, and you realize like you can get better at something. I realize that a lot of these things that we're working on, I'm usually terrible at it that first iteration. And then I also have to observe some of the other people, see how they're doing it. Like I see how the coach does it. I see how the other people are doing it because they have to learn it from scratch. I do it, and then I realize I didn't do it well. And then the second time around, I'm still observing other people. I'm also trying it. And by the time I get to the third iteration, now I have a better idea of like, oh, I was supposed to do it with this technique. So I think with some of the language learning, allow yourself to have some of those bad iterations, bad repetitions, to just get those mistakes out of your system, and then come back to it, do it a little bit better. But a lot of people will usually give up once they make that first mistake or once they have that first bad experience. And I think that's unfortunate because it's really important to commit to do it again, get a little bit better at it, give it some time, keep doing it. And that's part of the habit forming process. It's not necessarily the perfect results on the first try, but what the objective is more the habit. Give yourself that opportunity to make it a habit. Don't expect it to be perfect in a week. So this speaking challenge of speaking involves so many different things, but it's usually a neglected skill. Everybody wants to read and write and listen and work on vocabulary and then speaking, I'm not ready yet. But so with this challenge, I don't care if people are ready. You're speaking anyway. And it's by turning that into a habit that you do get ready for other situations. I think it's a skill that needs to be trained. It needs to be activated on a regular basis for it to be useful, especially for remembering vocabulary or things like that. Okay. I'm gonna have to turn off my microphone here for a second. Let me look at some of your questions. I've got some background noise here from my kids, but let me turn off my microphone for a second. Let me look if you guys have questions here. Okay, so back slightly, still some background noise, but let's just recap what we've looked at here because we've been talking, rambling for an hour here. But so first of all, check out, if you haven't yet, Charles Duhigg, his TED Talk, The Power of Habit. He's also been invited on a couple podcast interviews that I've heard, usually telling similar stories that he's mentioned in his podcast or in his TED Talk and also in his book. His book is excellent. I highly recommend that. And with the power habit, there is a trigger. There's something that will remind you to take action. So on your cell phone, you might want to download an app that like a reminder, or set in some little alarms throughout the day. There are apps that are designed for that. I was watching on Instagram, I think yesterday or the day before that, one person had posted something about her alarms, the reminders that she had set on her phone to take care of certain things. So there are things like that. You can help create the habit if you don't remember yourself. And think about the rewards and the anticipation of that process. What is it that you're getting out of it? Try to make it an enjoyable process. Do it in a place you like, with something that is comfortable, something that you want to anticipate, something that you want to look forward to. You don't want to do this in a situation that's going to make you feel uncomfortable or in pain or stressed out. So if you associate speaking practice with pain, discomfort, embarrassment, mistakes, frustration, that's not going to be conducive to creating a good habit. But if you can associate this with good things and the rewards, that will make the habit forming process a little bit easier. And then the planning ahead, so know what you're going to work on next, so you don't have to think about that so much and just come to a blank page, or kind of opening the refrigerator and like, well, what are we going to eat? And there's nothing ready, and I'm tired, I'm hungry. So with your learning process, try to anticipate what you're going to learn next. Create non-negotiables. So like, what's the minimum thing you do every day? So for some people, that like in hygiene, that would be, okay, at least brush my teeth twice a day, at least take a shower once a day, call my parents once a day, learn 5 words once a day, go for a walk once a day. So what are some of your language learning like non-negotiables that every day you at least do something? Make that a habit. And that's another thing I forgot to mention here with the power of habit. Charles Duhigg talks about anchor habits. So if you can create a non-negotiable habit, other habits can link on top of that. So for example, there's also a really good program, I forgot to mention this, but the Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. Let me get a link there. And with the Miracle Morning, that's a series of maybe like about five actions to take care of, like in the morning. There is savers. Let me look that up. I should have had this before. So these savers are, where are they? I'm sorry, here, should have found this before. The savers, what he recommends on here, if I can, yeah. And this creates a anchor habit. So every morning, people are dedicating a little bit of time. They're getting up a little bit earlier, and they're trying to accomplish a few of these things, which would be silence. So that could be for meditation, affirmations. Those would be like positive thoughts, reflecting on kind of what you want in your life. The visualization, again, that's kind of seeing yourself doing that. Getting some exercise, that doesn't really need much of an explanation. Reading, learning some new things, what kind of you have for your input. And scribing, this is just another way to say writing. So the idea is these savers, you do these some meditation, positive thinking, visualize what you're going to want to accomplish or your goals, get a little bit of physical exercise, maybe yoga, something like that, do some reading. So surround yourself with good input, maybe self-help books and scribing. So do some journaling, some reflection on there. And relating that with power habit, that becomes an anchor habit. And then other aspects of people's lives, they can apply turning some positive change, making one habit that can link to other things. So for example, right now I'm taking care of my health. What other things could I improve? So this idea of what can I improve next? What else can I improve? What else can I improve? So that can lead to changes on a variety of things. So if you focus on your speaking in the speaking challenge, there might be a thing of, well, what next could I improve? So we've mentioned here, as Sarah and Tatiana mentioned here, like, well, I could go from writing to like writing and speaking, and maybe take some of the things that I've been putting in the emails and can I say those in other languages? So I could expand on some of those habits. And if I'm already doing one thing, what else could I associate with that and add to it without feeling overwhelmed? So yeah, those trigger habits, rewards, the anticipation, planning ahead, making it a minimum effort, and as a non-negotiable that you do it no matter what. That did work for me before I go to bed, but the results is that I'm usually tired and I'm not as effective, productive with what I say when I'm just exhausted. So it would be better to put that earlier in the day, earlier in the schedule, get it off, check it off your list, and have a feeling of accomplishment early in the day, as opposed to a feeling of, I haven't done it yet. So that creates anxiety, that creates frustration. Like, I haven't done a recording yet and I'm tired. Tomorrow. That waiting until the end of the day when you're tired and exhausted, there's a big risk of procrastination, and then it becomes tomorrow and tomorrow. So it's better to do these things earlier in the day. And as I mentioned there, as an obliger, if I turn on my phone and I have all of these notifications, there's a chance that I'm going to neglect my own efforts, my own commitments. So before I turn on the phone, and one thing I do when I go to bed is I turn my phone on airplane mode, so I don't get any notifications or beep, beep, beep. The only thing that I get from my phone is the alarm clock in the morning to wake up, but everything else is just, it's on airplane mode. So then I can take care of my own things first. So I've been reading a little bit the Miracle Morning. I haven't really implemented it yet, but I think I am inspired to start doing that. There's an excellent Facebook group associated with that book. Those are a lot of highly motivated people who are trying out the book, and they have a lot of great insights about habit forming. And so go check out that Facebook group. Let me see if I can get that here. Yeah, there's about 243,000 members in there. So if you want a dose of inspiration and motivation about habit, go check out these people in this Facebook group. They would be able to tell you a lot more about how the Miracle Morning is going for them. So yeah, that's just to say I've put my phone on airplane mode. So when I wake up, I do have to make a conscious choice of, do I turn it back like on for the connections and the notifications, or should I make a conscious effort, do my stuff first, my speaking practice, maybe write today's email when I'm in bed, or at least the ideas, thinking about it, so I'm not writing it at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, and realizing I haven't sent it yet, and what I'm going to talk about in this email. And as I said, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm not doing my best reflection when I'm writing that daily email at the end of the day. So it would be better, not only for the speaking practice, but also for the writing what's going to be in the email. It's better if I get that set up early in the morning and not let it wait until the end of the day when my energy is depleted, my concentration is depleted, and fatigue is starting to increase. So there's just things to reflect on for the habit forming process, but definitely check out Charles Duhigg, Gretchen Rubin with these 4 tendencies and how you deal with external and internal commitments and factors. And also here, Hal Elrod with the Miracle Morning. Those are really good programs that would help you reflect on that habit forming process. And definitely be kind to yourself. Nobody's perfect. We're always learning new things. But just give yourself the chance to do something a little bit each day, improve something slightly each day, and just come back to the next day. So thank you very much for joining me here. Have a great rest of your day, evening, afternoon, and I'll see you in a upcoming weekly coaching call here. Haven't figured out what we're going to talk about next. I should have done that planning ahead, but I'll reach out to some of you and see what topics you would like to discuss or like to get some feedback on. So talk to you soon and take care.